Okay, so this week is going to be on Thor. I apologize again that this is being posted on Wednesday instead of on Tuesday. Like I posted last night onto our blog, my iPad decided to lose all the video files that I had recorded and edited and arranged into this wonderful little video. So I apologize that this video is not going to be as good as the last couple weeks, but it's also going to be a lot shorter than the last previous weeks. Mostly because there's really not that much to talk about with Thor. As an Avenger, he's kind of the one that's just there. Certainly he is important and he is an integral part of the team, but he doesn't really operate solely on the realm of superheroes. He operates on a realm that's above that, a mythic level, if you will. And so we're going to be talking a lot about mythology in Marvel Comics and in comics, and how comics are becoming mythology. So it's going to be a lot more theory, if you will, this week, versus the last 2 weeks when we've been talking about Captain America and Iron Man, where we kind of have to tell their story. Thor does fight with the Avengers, and he fights with them in their big battles and stuff, but he doesn't operate within the same realm of humanity as Iron Man and Captain America and Hulk and Black Widow and Hawkeye do. He has Asgard to return to and the whole of the universe, basically. He fights these mythic heroes, and he does battle with the Jotun, and it's cool, but it's not as integral to the plot line of the Avengers, like, if that makes any sense. I'm trying to figure out how to explain this to you guys the best way that I possibly can. So, I think that's all I can give you as a preamble to this lecture. So, let's get started. Okay, so the first appearance that Thor makes in any comic ever was in August of 1962. It was in issue number 83 of Journey into Mystery. I remember that I said last week that most of these heroes get their start in Tales of Suspense, but Thor actually gets it in Journey into Mystery, which is kind of like a similar comic, but he doesn't necessarily become part of the Avengers or interact with members of the Avengers until the formation of them. Like, we have Iron Man and Black Widow were villains, actually. Like, they were opposed to each other before she ever joined the team, or the Avengers ever even was an idea, but that doesn't really happen with Thor in his comics. He is, once again, on a different realm, a different plane of existence, if you will. It's the same universe, but not necessarily related completely. So he was created by Stan Lee, Stan Lee's brother, Larry Lieber, and Jack Kirby. Stan Lee created the character. He outlined all the characters and the plot line for the first comic, and then from there he gave it to his brother, who went in and filled in the entire story, wrote the dialogue, all that stuff, and then of course it was sent then to Jack Kirby to pencil. Jack Kirby is, of course, pretty much all the Avengers were originally designed by Jack Kirby. He was very, very important in the creative process. But yeah, so with Thor, whenever Stan Lee was thinking of a new character to introduce into the comics, he mentioned in an interview, he said, how do you make someone stronger than the strongest person? You don't make them human. You make them a god. And so Stan Lee took that idea and he kind of ran with it, and he figured that his readers were too familiar with the Greek and Roman myths, that it had already been overdone in art and literature, which, if you ask me, probably was. So Stan decided to go with the Norse mythology, and also added benefit of that was whenever he read the Norse myths, he would always picture these heroes and these gods like the Vikings of old, so these big, larger-than-life warriors with these massive beards and weapons the size of themselves, which is always awesome for characters to have kind of an idea and a place to go off of to start with the Vikings. So yeah, and so then he outlined the story, gave it to his brother, Jack Kirby, designed it. But yeah, so what Stan Lee decided to do, like with his character in making Thor a god, he kind of played with the idea that perhaps these gods of old, these ancient gods from myths, were actually beings from another planet or another realm with greater technology than the primitive humans that were on Earth at the time, and they viewed them as deities of such. And so he took that idea and ran with it and made Thor an alien. If you remember Kat Denning's line in Thor, where she said, a primitive species such as a primitive civilization such as the Vikings could have viewed visitors from another planet as deities. And so I think, I love her character in Thor, so. But yeah, so Thor is from Asgard, which is pretty much what it tells us in the movie, and what it tells us in myth, and what it tells us in the comics, and what it tells us in everything, basically. Thor is Asgardian. He is the son of Odin, so his full name is Thor Odinson. Now, his team affiliations, because he is from Asgard, his primary affiliation with a group of peoples would be the Asgardians. So his primary team affiliation is Asgard. Followed second by the Avengers, then the Warriors 3, which, if you remember from the movie, you have the blonde guy with the awesome goatee and the sword, rapier. That is Fandral. Then Volstagg, the big rotund guy with the awesome beard. Ginger beards are always the best. And then you have Hogan. I can't remember the actor's name who played him, but he's the one with like all the weapons, and he has weapons hid all over his person, and he is proficient at every weapon. But those are the Warriors 3, and so that's a group that Thor is part of. And then he's also part of the Thor Corps and the God Squad. Everything has to rhyme in comics. That's what makes a snazzy team name. It has to rhyme. But yeah, that really comes in like the late 80s, early 90s. And it really has nothing to do with the Avengers, or even the people from the Avengers. It has more to do with the universe as a whole. But yeah, and then he's also part of the Uncanny Avengers, which is a series of the comics that run in the 2000s. So yeah. His aliases include Sigmund, Siegfried, Dr. Donald Blake, Jake Olsen, Sigurd Jarlsson, and Eric Masterson. These are either bodies that he was sent and put into by Odin or some deity, alien. or it's someone, like he's taken the form of them, like he has taken the name and kind of disappeared almost. Now his abilities are split into two categories: those that are part of himself and those that come when he wields Mjolnir, his hammer. So the powers that he has, like himself, include superhuman strength. I mean, his name, he's God. You know, he's gotta have superhuman strength. He has speed and agility, endurance and longevity. So basically, he can survive for a long ass time, and he has. But it also, he also has a healing factor that lends to the endurance and longevity. Now, whenever he wields Mjolnir, he has the power of flight, energy absorption and projection, weather manipulation, dimensional transportation, and electrical manipulation. Basically, the powers that he gains from Mjolnir are the powers that you generally associate with Thor from myth. He is a storm god. He's the god of thunder in Norse mythology, and so the powers that he gains via Mjolnir are his more traditional powers. So yeah, we have that. Now, with Thor's story, it kind of starts along the same lines as the movie presents, though there is more to Thor's banishment. But basically, Thor's story starts with Odin thinking that his son needs to be taught humility, and so he takes Thor and places him without his memories of godhood. That's important. Like, he has no memory of ever being a god. And he takes Thor's essence, basically, his person, and puts him into the body of a pre-existing med student who's partially disabled. It's Donald Blake. If you remember from the movie, a little homage was paid to Thor's original alias, alter ego, as Jane Foster's original boyfriend, her ex-boyfriend. They mentioned that she has the clothes still around. Great with patience, not so great in relationships. But yeah, he's placed into the body of Donald Blake. And Donald Blake goes through med school, he becomes a doctor, and then he decides, like all graduating doctors, that he's gonna go vacay in Norway. Hey! Sorry, that was the worst. But anyway, he goes to Norway, and while he's there, there's an alien attack, and they kind of herd him towards this cave, and so Donald runs into this cave, tries to hide from them, and he happens upon this stick while he's in this cave. But little does he know, this stick is actually Mjolnir in disguise. And so he picks up the stick, and through a course of events, he ends up banging the stick against the wall or the ground, or he bangs it against something. And all of a sudden, bim, bam, boom, god of thunder. He turns into Thor. It's crazy, it's insane, and it doesn't make a lick of sense. So he defeats the aliens that invaded in Norway, and he goes back because he decides that he needs to live a double life now, because every hero has to live a double life. And so half of his time he lives his life as Donald Blake, doctor extraordinaire, part-time romantic fling with a Jane Foster. She's a nurse in the hospital that he works at. And then half of the time he's the Norse god of thunder, protecting humanity from the perils of the universe. So as he's on Earth and protecting Earth, his presence draws the attention of Loki, his brother, this is comic canon, okay? That he is like foster brothers with Loki. This is not how it is portrayed in myth. Loki is strictly a trickster character in myth. So they decide to create a deeper connection and a more complex connection between the characters of Loki and Thor in the comics by making them brothers. Brothers in arms, brothers not really by blood, but definitely by upbringing. And Loki is pretty much hell-bent on causing problems in Thor's life. He's a little shit. He just wants to cause issues and make things more difficult for his brother. And he's actually responsible for 3 of Thor's principal foes. 1 is Absorbing Man, 2 is the Wrecker, and 3 is the Destroyer. And this Destroyer, it ends up becoming almost like this suit of armor that different people possess. Not possess in the sense that it's mine, it's my possession, but possess as in their essence becomes part of the Destroyer and they become the Destroyer. And that is in the movie. The big suit of armor type thing that Odin controls, and then Loki controls, and sends after Thor, that is the Destroyer. But yeah, Loki pretty much just causes all issues for Thor that he can. Of course, in doing so, he accidentally causes the formation of the Avengers. Meaning accidentally for him, because they end up causing all these issues for him. So it wasn't really that good foresight on Loki's part. But yeah, that goes on. Loki's always causing issues for Thor. Thor is always defeating them because, hey, it's Thor. He's the hero of his own comic. He can't lose. He can, but forget about it. So while Thor is on Earth, he falls in love with Jane Foster, has this whole Ariel Triton, Daddy, I love her, issue with Odin, and refuses to return to Asgard. He refuses to leave Earth and leave Jane, and Odin's hella pissed, and he's like, damn it, kid. And so Odin ends up punishing Thor multiple times for this instance of disobedience. We'll go with that, because it's not betrayal. Thor is just sticking with his guns and staying on Earth because he feels that that is his duty, that is his place to be. So yeah. Later on in his story, I think it's like the 80s. Yeah, it's the 80s. Mid to late 80s, it's revealed that Thor's connection to Earth is because he is the son of the elder goddess Gaia, which, if you remember from Greek mythology, if you've ever read it, she is the Earth Mother. She and Uranus produce most everything on Earth. They're all her babies. And apparently so's Thor. That's something that we need to talk about. The connection between all pantheon of gods in Marvel Comics. Marvel Comics doesn't stick to one set of gods. It accepts and uses all gods in every mythology. So there are instances of Greek gods and Roman gods and Egyptian gods and Norse gods all interacting and working together or against each other throughout the course of the Marvel comic universe. So it's not just that the Norse gods are actually real, it's every god is real in a sense. And they're introduced either as villains or as heroes, or as judging parties. It's complicated, but it's fascinating information to include. But there's also instances of heroes, like mythic heroes, showing up in the comics. Like Hercules actually shows up, and he and Thor fight together, and they end up being biffles. And their first meeting, of course, is like in the 60s, and then he later on in like the 90s, he comes back and helps Thor, or Thor helps him, but they fight together again, and yeah, they're best friends for life, guys. But yeah, so towards the end of the 60s and early 70s, Thor and Jane go through this trial in their relationship where Odin kind of gets off his high horse. Sleep here. Sorry. God. Norse mythology makes me giggle. Anyway, where Odin kind of decides that, okay, fine, you're in love with her, I'm kind of cool with this, let's give her a chance, maybe if she passes this trial, she can come live on Asgard and be immortal, and you guys can be together forever. Quite literally forever. But Jane Foster ends up failing this trial, she panics, Thor has to come and save her. And Odin is like, see, I told you she wasn't good enough for you. Now she's going to go back to Earth and you're going to stay here on Asgard, Thor. And so Jane goes back to Earth, but Odin, through some fit of, I'm going to be a little bit nice, he causes her to fall in love with this other human. And they end up living happily ever after. Sort of. As much as a comic character in the Marvel Universe can live happily ever after. But yeah, so Thor is stuck on Asgard, and he's sad because he no longer has this Pookie, and then Odin is like, hey Thor, check out over there, check out that hot piece of ass. And that's how Thor meets Lady Sif, one of the Valkyrie. And she is awesome. She really is. I really, really, really liked how they portrayed her in the movies. Because she's a strong female character who is literally a strong female character. She is not tied up in a love triangle. There's like no Thor, Sif, Jane love triangle going on in that movie, because it's always Thor only has eyes for Jane, and Sif fights and she wants to protect her friend, her childhood friend, like she grew up with them in movie canon. They all fought together. Thor was the one who kind of supported her in her bid to become this warrior, and I love the fact that she is so loyal to her friend. It's just awesome. I love how they portrayed her. But yeah, over the course of the comics, Loki continues to fuck shit up. Thor continues to fix it. Thor returns to Asgard multiple times to defend it. There is one villain who continues to come back because he is determined to wield the Odin sword and start Ragnarok. This is Mangog. Also, my pronunciation, if I pronounce it wrong, I am sorry. I am trying my best, but the Thor comics is whenever you get a lot of the Norse gods and stuff, and I cannot pronounce it to save my life. We're actually studying it right now in my ancient mythology course, and I still can't pronounce it. But yeah, so Mangog, he's defeated this first time. He comes back again later in the comics to try and wield the sword again. That lends to the false Ragnarok plot line, which goes on. And then in the 80s, there's sort of a deal that goes on with it's the Celestials plot line. It's hard to explain. I'm definitely going to be linking you guys to the Thor Wikipedia page. It might be able to explain it just a bit more for you guys, because it's complicated stuff, because you have multiple pantheon of gods who are real, who are aliens, who are defeating other aliens. There's tribute, there's all these different things, because while it is operating on a human level, it's not, because it's paying attention to ancient mythology and stuff like that. So it's very complicated in that sense. But yeah, so most of Thor's time is spent on Asgard, but he does return to Earth and he fights with the Avengers, he forms the Avengers, he partakes in their going-ons multiple times. They even help him in saving Asgard a couple times. But Thor does not really operate, the majority of his storyline and his comic plotline does not operate on Earth. He kind of stays out of their goings-on. And the Civil War plotline, I'm going to try and explain everybody's part in the Civil War, but it's hard to explain Thor's because technically he was not part of it, but also he kind of was, because Tony somehow got his hands on Thor's DNA and cloned him to fight in pro and anti-registration battles, and Thor gets really mad at Tony, duels with Tony, defeats Tony, and Tony's like, hey man, don't kill me, I'm really, really sorry. How about we make Asgard, which has been rebuilt over Oklahoma for some strange reason. I mean, what says immortal home of the ancient gods, like the wind coming sweeping down the plains, you know? So Tony's like, here, Thor, let's give Asgard its own amnesty, its own embassy. It is its own operating country, basically, on Earth. And Thor's like, okay, I like that. That's cool. I'm good with that. So that's kind of like what happens with the Civil War plotline. And he faces multiple big galactic threats. He doesn't really face the earthly supervillains as much, though he does have a thing with Doom one time, like in an arc of the comics. Thor defeats Doom after Doom gets transported somewhere. Doom goes on crazy adventures and stuff. But yeah, so Thor doesn't really stoop to the low level of the mortal villains. He ends up battling these great galactic forces, which happens to include Galactus, pretty much the World Eater. He is a quite literally a big, big bad, because he eats worlds. And so he has to be defeated a couple times by the Avengers and by Thor and by other people. I want to say the Guardians of the Galaxy actually do fight him a couple times. But yeah, Thor, he operates on a higher level than the other heroes. So it doesn't exactly correlate too much with the Avengers, like his comic plotline, though he is an Avenger himself. So yeah, that is Thor's story. It's very glossed over because it's hard to explain his story and give it bit by bit like we can for the others, because there's really no point of comparison to any of the other Avengers. And I don't want to confuse you guys with this galactic and mythic level of the comics when we're really focusing on the Avengers and their human villains and problems and stuff. So yeah, that's Thor. Okay guys, so I wanted to take the last few minutes of this lecture to talk about mythology and comics. We talked about earlier in the lecture that Thor operates on a mythic level in the Marvel comic universe. And that is important because it includes a lot of the gods and the heroes from mythology, but it also almost humanizes these heroes and these gods, creates a more complex nature to their characters than we're really given in the myths that we know and that we love, which is always a good thing. Like, it's always good to go back to the old stories to kind of preserve the tradition, but also to create new traditions. And there's possibilities that later on in the history of humanity, it could be that archaeologists and ancient anthropologists look back at this time and see these heroes and these stories that we create in these comics and assume and think that they were gods for us. Because when you think about it, we have action figures which can be seen as little idols of these gods, that we have these complex stories and backgrounds and awesome stuff to go with it, you know? We have created almost a religion around these comics. We have conventions, religious conventions, where people go and they dress up as their favorite characters in these stories that we're telling. And it's fascinating that maybe somewhere down the line in the history of humanity that these comic characters become deities. It becomes this awesome thing. So maybe somewhere like 3,000 years down the road, kids will be studying the Civil War comic arc in the Marvel Universe the same way that they're studying the Iliad now. And it's fascinating to think that we're creating mythology right now. We're creating complex stories and complex characters that represent humanity in our world, but also what we hope to be and what we strive to be like. There's a greater world in these comics that we want to achieve, and it's fascinating to think like that. So that actually is going to be our topic for your responses. I want you to kind of discuss the representation of mythology in the Marvel comics, but also talk about how the Marvel comics are becoming their own mythology and their own mythos. And so, yeah, I kind of want you guys to just go through and do that. So, that is this week's lecture. Because I had issues with losing all the files of the video, again, I apologize greatly for that. I am going to be making both the assignments due on Saturday again. You don't have to worry about doing the quiz to be turned in by Thursday night, because apparently technology hates me, and it makes me cry because I love technology, but it doesn't love me back. Also, I wanted to say a disclaimer before the end of this video for your responses. When you talk about gods and you talk about how Thor is a god, be sure to use the lowercase g, because when you use the uppercase g to refer to God and gods, that is wrong. It's a pet peeve of mine, and it drives me insane when people do that, because capital G God is a title of the Judeo-Christian God Elohim, and it's kind of a way to refer to that specific god. But when you're talking about how Thor and Odin and Loki, they are gods, it is not an actual title. It is not a proper noun. It is just a noun. So it gets a lowercase g. So please remember that, because if you do it in your responses, I will take off points. I am sorry, but it drives me insane, because I have read so many fics where it's like Jane thinking about Thor, or one of the other Avengers thinking about how Thor is a god and it's capital G, and I'm like, no, that's not right, damn it. But yeah, it causes issues and it gives me an ulcer, and you don't want that. So remember to use a lowercase g unless you're referring to the Judeo-Christian God Elohim, and yeah, toodles.